All right, hello again, everybody. Welcome back to Airbus 320 Tech Talk. What do all those buttons do? I am in Nashville today on an overnight. Thank you again for joining me, and apologies for the lapse in time since I was able to make another video. Life happens, you get busy, but I'm back here with every intent of continuing our discussion that we started, going over all the buttons inside the Airbus flight deck. So thank you again for joining me. Picking up where we left off last time, though. When we finished the last video, we kind of completed our discussion about the entire left side of the overhead here. So today we're going to start a discussion about the center section here, and the first one on the top here that we've got to talk about in the content of today's discussion, like I said, is the fire section of the panel here. So first, I just wanted to kind of tell you a little bit about some portions of the fire system on board the airplane. Kind of some high-level stuff, and then after that we'll kind of come back and we'll talk about each of the buttons and the lights and everything, and what they do, how we use them, all that kind of stuff. So just from a very high-level perspective on most all transport category aircraft, we talk about this business about how we have both fire detection and fire protection. So not only do we have a way, of course, that the airplane will let us know when there is a fire, but we also have a means of fighting that fire for obvious reasons. So we'll kind of talk about each of those two things in specific. So, first off, we want to talk about what areas of the airplane do we have fire protection in, and there's a couple more areas, I guess, that are covered, with that concept, like outside of this panel right here. We'll talk about those at a later point in time. But of course, up here we're just talking about some of the most important parts of the airplane. It's the two main engines and the APU. So with all three of these systems here, like we said, we have a means of theoretically, like very quickly, figuring out there's a problem. And then if we need to take some sort of corrective action, i.e. like put out a fire, which is obviously a very serious condition in nature, there's a very quick way we can do that, through this panel here. So let's first talk a little bit about the main engines, and kind of what we have, as far as that portion of the system is concerned. And I guess the concept applies to both of these things, but from a very simple standpoint, the way that we detect if there's a fire in the engines or the APU is we have these wires that are kind of snaked through these important parts of the engine that work off a general kind of electrical principle. So I'm just going to kind of throw a few concepts at you here. But first of all, within the engines, each of them, we kind of have three areas, so to speak, that have this fire detection mounted in them, and that is the engine pylon nacelle, the engine core, and the engine fan section. So you can kind of see in this graphic here what we're talking about. The forward section here, where the big fan is here. Of course, that's the fan section. Then we have the core of the engine, which is kind of the interior inner workings where the compression is taking place and whatnot. And ignition, and then the pylon, of course, which is how the engine is mounted onto the underside of the wing there. So these are the three areas that we talk about when we talk about these wires that snake through. And what I mean as far as these wires are concerned, this is the actual sensing apparatus, or the way that the airplane tells us or figures out if there's a fire in any one of those areas. So basically the general concept of how this works is you have this, they call it a dual loop, or a two-wire fire loop, continuous loop type of system on our modern airplanes. And basically it works from this general principle of continuity, where the two wires are kind of, they know there's a computer that knows like where, what amount of electricity is supposed to be passing through these wires at all point in time, and it kind of looks at the two and compares them and figures out what's happening with each one of them. And if it detects some sort of anomaly, it's going to trigger a fire warning. So to give you an example, let's say when things heat up, the electrical properties kind of change, or if there's a break in the line, of course the electricity stops flowing through there, kind of thing. And the system is designed, like I said, to watch that and figure out when that condition is happening. So if like we said, if there's a fire going on inside the engine there, or there's actually a break in the line, maybe your fire has actually burnt through any portion of this wire, the system knows to like trigger this alarm, and that's really the way that it tells us or figures out that the fire is occurring. So basically, you have these two loops, loop A and loop B, in the case of the main engines there, and the APU, I suppose. And like I said, there's a computer that's always kind of watching out, and if it figures out something's going on, it feeds signals into the ECAM, and it sends an oral warning. We're going to kind of talk about what these things sound like and what they look like a little bit later on down the line. But that's just a very basic, like high level type of concept about how that stuff works in there. So you can see this graphic here just depicts like kind of what the inside of like one of these lines looks like, and I pulled a few more graphics. These are just some kind of general pictorial depictions out of like a maintenance textbook kind of thing, so they're not necessarily completely specific to the Airbus, but just to give you kind of an idea of like what some of these things look like. This is just a graphic of one of the mounting brackets, and you can kind of see the wire like snaking through this little holder portion of this bracket here. And as you'd imagine, there's all these little like tiny orifices and these curves and bends and things that the wires are snaked around when they're inside the engine. This next graphic kind of gives you an idea of like, this concept where, if there was a kink in the line or a break or a sharp bend or something, this is, of course, like, part of the way the airplane's figuring out if there's a fire. So, this is more for the maintenance technicians here that, when they're reinstalling these things, of course, they're being careful of that concept. But just like I said, the graphic kind of gives you an idea of, there's all these little mounting points. And then if you were to look inside the engine, you'd see these lines kind of tracing their track, however the manufacturers have figured that they need to be. So those are the fire loops, or these wires. Like I said, when you kind of hear this term. And let's see. So like I said, you have these wires that kind of detect like when a fire is occurring, and if a fire is happening. Like I said, of course, we have this means of fighting that fire, and the way that we do that is by like passing out a extinguishing agent like into the engine section there. And so there's these bottles of this extinguishing agent that exist, 2 for each main engine and 1 for the APU compartment. And these used to be filled with halon. I want to say like up until like the mid 90s at some point. Halon was the extinguishing agent that was inside these bottles. It would be like discharged into the engine section, like we said, to kind of do what they needed to do. And I don't know the exact chemistry of what's inside these things these days, but it's some sort of hydrofluorocarbon or something like that. I think I was reading in one of the manuals, but it's kind of irrelevant to us as pilots. It's just like we know, hey, these things are on board, and this is what we have. This is the way that we can kind of fight a fire. So this graphic, once again, not an Airbus specific graphic, but certainly kind of identifies the concept where you have these 2 bottles of extinguishing agents like mounted. In the case of the Airbus, like kind of in the engine pylon nacelle there, and you can kind of see the routing, from bottle 1 and bottle 2, just where each of these goes. And actually, it looks like this graphic is slightly inaccurate because this one is depicting. I think from a lot of airplanes will actually have 2 bottles that kind of feed both engines, so this is not completely accurate, like I said, to the Airbus system, but. Kind of forget about that, for now. But just like I said, what I wanted to kind of do is show you like what these bottles look like. And this squib here, we're going to talk about this in a second. So you have the extinguishing agent that resides just kind of waiting under really high pressure in this bottle here. And then after we've kind of armed the system, if we determine we need to fight a fire, we have a means of discharging this agent, like we said, into the engine area there. And that's what this squib, his job there is to kind of allow for that to happen. So it's this kind of electrical, like a small little, think of like an explosion that kind of breaks this diaphragm that's kind of holding all of the extinguishing agent back. And when that is pierced, just the pressure alone kind of shoots it out, into where it needs to go. And, that's after that happens, you'll see a discharge light. We'll kind of come back and talk about that on the panel there, like we said. So those are the fire bottles, and once again, I just kind of pulled like a generic graphic because I couldn't necessarily find a specific Airbus one, but this is just like a real life version of what these things kind of look like up inside the interior of the aircraft wherever they're located at. So you can just kind of get a general idea about what they are, what they look like, and what their job is, so to speak. So let's see, one other thing that I wanted to mention. So we kind of talked about the engines and where their fire detection is available. And by contrast, the APU is just a little bit different in that the fire loops are not located inside the actual APU. They're just kind of routed inside this rectangular kind of compartment that the APU like sits up inside of. And for whatever reason, the manufacturer just decided that was more than acceptable and a better way of applying the system to the APU area there. So just one kind of little interesting technical nuance to describe as far as that is concerned. So let's see, moving on from there. Let's see, we talked about extinguishing. Let's see. Okay. All right. Well, let's talk now a little bit about once again how we use the system and what all the lights mean and what happens when we press the buttons. So in general, most of the time, as you would imagine, we're not using this panel to actually fight a fire unless we were in some sort of emergency condition. But every day as part of our normal operation, we do certainly use this test button here. And I'll kind of show you what that looks like at the end of the video. I took another video the other day when I was at work just to kind of show you like how the airplane behaves and what it sounds like and what all the indications are that come up. And we'll kind of read through those really quickly as part of the discussion here. But we use this test button during the first flight of the day. So to make sure all the systems are working correctly and they're everything's indicating as it should, all the lights work, all this kind of stuff. If we have a crew change, so let's say we assume the airplane from another flight crew, halfway through the day, we kind of retest the system, or you would retest it again if there was some kind of maintenance action completed on the plane. You would of course just make sure that everything's working appropriately, and you'd use that test button as such. But other than that, like I said, we're never really using these buttons unless you actually had a fire, as you would imagine. Pretty straightforward concept there. So let's talk about, so for example, here on the engine 1 section, of course, engine 1 and engine 2 have identical buttons and lights and indications, all that kind of stuff. So just on the left and right side here, we have an agent 1 and an agent 2, and that just refers directly to bottle number 1 and bottle number 2. So the way this kind of works is if you have a fire detected, these really bright red lights are going to come on. And like I said, there's a lot of other things that happen, which we'll talk about in a second. But you would go through your procedures and you would basically open up this little safetying mechanism here. This is what this little latch is here for. And you would push the fire button, and it would then pop out, and it would arm both of the squibs in Agent 1 and Agent 2. So it's kind of like like I said, like a built-in safety. If you were just to reach up and hit one of these agent bottles, without having pushed this fire button, you couldn't discharge the extinguishing agent into the engine for obvious reasons. You wouldn't want to do that into a normally operating engine because it would probably kill it, or not 100% sure about that, but it definitely wouldn't be good. It's not the way that the system's designed, of course. So just a little safety, nuance of the system that's built in there. But anyways, the squib lights would come on and let you know that the squibs are armed. If you decided to discharge like both the extinguishing agents, you would just push the button, and once the bottle detects that there's no more pressure in there, the discharge lights will kind of come on to verify that everything is emptied. And that just tells you the system is advertised or the system has worked as advertised. So that's just a little bit about what the lights and the buttons do. And like we said, the test button is just there to just verify that everything is working as it's supposed to be, and just make sure that it's in good condition for our normal flight operations kind of thing. So. The APU one, works more or less in the same way. Like we said, it's just that there's only one extinguishing agent in association with the APU compartment there. And like I said, we'll talk about there's all these kind of internal actions that occur. When you press this button, that's I wanted to kind of highlight and give you a little bit more detail on. So, all right, so let's talk about when you hit the test button. What exactly happens? So you push and hold it down, and what's going to happen is a continuous repetitive chime will sound. So you get the ding, 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 3 chime master warning. The master warning lights will flash kind of on the glare shield area of the forward panel. The engine fire warning will appear on the ECAM, so kind of in the center between the pedestal there. And on the fire panel itself, the engine fire push button light will come on in red as you see it here. The squib lights come on. The discharge lights come on in amber. And and then there's one other area of the panel that is in association with when you do this testing function, and that is down on the actual engine starting area. You can kind of see it. Unfortunately, I didn't do a lights test, so you can't see the writing here, but there's actually a fire, like red illuminated, just a sign there that'll come on, and just this kind of panel agrees with what's happening on the overhead there, and it's just like I said, kind of a way to, if you were down here looking for whatever reason, just to kind of know that like that is the engine where the fire is occurring. And I think it's kind of with a couple, or one of the things I wanted to say about like with all this stuff, it's interesting the way they design these systems. Of course, they try to make them to be as foolproof as possible. And I know it sounds crazy, but in the commotion of things, it has happened in the past where the flight crew has actually shut down the wrong engine. There's been so much commotion or panic maybe in the heat of the moment where they were trying to address whatever problem they had. So I think it's interesting how the manufacturers like put as much safeguards in place to just make you like verify for like 100% certainty that you're actually, extinguishing the correct engine. And for obvious reasons, you wouldn't want it to take down your good engine if one was having a fire, because then the problem would be way worse than just a fire in one engine. It would be like having no engines at that point. So just kind of an interesting thing. Like I said, in my opinion, it seems like they put this down here just to kind of remind you that if you were actually down here to manipulate these engine switches down here, that it would just kind of reaffirm that you're doing it in the right location. And also too, like backing up, where we talked about this guarded switch here. We had mentioned this in one of the other videos. I mean, there's several other places where you have these guarded portions of the switches, like here, for example. And anytime we see a guarded switch, if you missed the last time we talked about that, it serves as kind of a stopping point for the crew to, you both agree that you're manipulating the appropriate thing that you're wishing to manipulate. So it kind of forces you to take pause, and before you lift the gate up here and press that button down, you talk amongst yourself for a brief second and say, okay, engine fire 1, push button confirm. Okay, yes, that's confirmed. And then the person taking the action will actually go ahead and press it. So just a little bit of add-on about that. Let's see. So also. Let's see, I wanted to kind of talk about, so those were all the actions that occurred when you hit the test button. And I wanted to talk about what actually happens when we hit the fire push button itself. So let's see, when the fire push button is actually depressed in, a couple things happen. It silences the aural fire warning. It arms the fire extinguisher squibs. It closes the low pressure fuel valve. It closes the hydraulic fire shutoff valve. Closes the engine bleed valve. Closes the pack flow control valve. Cuts off the FADEC power supply to the engine, and it deactivates the IDG. So once again, kind of a lot of textbook, like really technical stuff that's going on when you press this button here, but kind of like just, once again from the high level, concept, it's like, the reason why they have this button there is that you can very quickly kind of like unplug the engine from all of the other systems and inner workings that the airplane uses to, or uses that engine for, just to kind of take it out of the loop, because obviously, there's something going really wrong in there if there's a fire, of course. And you just need to kind of have a way to get it out of the system and prevent, like, maybe it from damaging other things or making your problem worse, kind of thing. So that's kind of like the concept about why they've, part of the reason they've designed this fire system in such a way so that you have a quick way of fighting the fire, kind of thing. So that kind of it wraps up most of what I wanted to say about the engine 1 and 2 portions there, which once again they work identically the same. The APU section, though, just some very slight differences, but just to hit them all for you. When you hit the APU fire test button, the CRC, continuous repetitive chimes, you get the master warning lights flashing on the forward glare shield. You get the APU fire warning on the ECAM. And on the fire panel, you get the squib and the discharge lights, and of course you get the big bright in your face fire is happening here, kind of light on the APU section here. So one other interesting thing that I also wanted to point out about the Airbus, and actually most other transport planes that I've flown have been this exact same way, and the logic kind of makes a lot of sense. The APU is actually very smart. If a fire is detected on the ground, or as opposed to like when you're out flying, you're actually airborne, on the ground, the APU will actually do an auto shutdown of itself, and it'll actually it will like take itself out of the loop, kind of thing, if it senses a fire in the system. And by contrast to that, when you're airborne, it'll shut the APU down, but it will not. Okay, sorry guys for the hiccup in the video there. I think I started to get ahead of myself, but I just needed to make sure I was saying the right thing in the right sequence. So getting back to what I was talking about, this APU business about things occurring automatically when you're on the ground versus when you're in flight. This is a really interesting concept, the way they designed this. There are periods of time when the APU is just running, when nobody's up on the flight deck because you're outside doing a walk around or you're doing some other sort of pre-flight preparations or what have you. So they've designed the airplane that if there is a fire detected while you're on the ground, the APU will actually shut itself down and it will extinguish the fire for you. So just kind of a little neat little like technical fact about the system there, and that differs though where if you were airborne and the APU detected a fire, you would have to take a crew action to actually use the extinguishing agent and discharge the bottle there into the APU compartment to get it to go out. So just kind of a little minor little thing, but I wanted to make sure I was getting it right before I told you that. So by contrast to that, the engines never have a condition where they'll automatically extinguish themselves, because as you would assume, there would never be a time when an engine is running without somebody up in the flight deck. So the logic of those two systems is kind of designed just a little bit differently. But like we said, that APU, because it gets so much used on the ground as part of the normal operation, and it might not be under the supervision of a flight crew, it kind of has that little safety built into it. So that kind of wraps up most of the technical stuff. Sorry, it's a lot of maybe minute details or whatever. But the last thing, like I said, I took a video just of the test, so you can kind of see it, what it looks like, what it sounds like. And let's see, I also had another photo that I wanted to show you after that, just so we can kind of get a little bit of detail about what the ECAM looks like and kind of one of the neat parts of the system. But I'll show you the video here. We'll play it 2 times so you can get a good look at it. But like we said, this is just what it looks like when you reach up and you hit the fire, the test button there. So go. All right, so like we said, you can hear all the sounds, lights, noises, everything that's indicated when you hit that test button, or like we said, in the case if there actually was a fire, that is what it would display to you. So just one more quick time here so you can see it and hear it. All right, so there's the video. And like I said, the last thing I wanted to do is I took a photo of the eCam, and I just wanted to show you what it actually looks like from a close-up standpoint. It's kind of neat. Okay, so here's the picture, like I said, that we're talking about. This kind of highlights, like, I think one of the coolest things about the Airbus is that, you know, if with a lot of problems that occur, it just puts like everything like right in your face that you need to do. So here we can see, you know, that the plane is telling us we have an engine fire and the number 1 engine there. And it just lists like all the corrective steps that you take. So you just go like right down the line when you're troubleshooting one of these problems, and it just makes it like really easy, really efficient. And, you know, once again, that's a contrast to other planes that I've flown, or, you know, past generations of airplanes, where you're actually kind of like, you know, you see the problem, you pull out this book, and then you have to kind of go like line item by line item down and follow the steps. So I mean, this you know, saves just a little bit of time, makes it easy. And these are like the very first initial actions that like need to be accomplished in this case, this engine 1 fire as an example. So just kind of wanted to give you an idea of what that looks like, give you a little more chance to take a look at it a little bit closer up. So that's about it for the fire panel, guys. Thank you again for joining me. As always, if you have questions, try to throw them in the comment section there. I'll do my best to field them for you. So really appreciate you guys tuning in, and if you like what you see, please hit the like button or subscribe, and it'll help me keep making more of these things for you. So until the next time, have a great day, and we'll talk to you later.